Glasses on today, guys. We're getting nerdy by designing injection molds for fishing lures in Fusion 360. Let's go into the computer. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do after you get your kind of main lure body completed is name the actual body. This is going to help you kind of keep track of everything when you get your mold halves in there, and it just makes everything easier all around. And this is the part I really suck at, so we're just going to call this triangle tail 4-inch because I'm super creative. That's kind of a triangular tail. Okay, then so the other thing that naming this does is when I go to export it as an STL file, if I wanted to print this as a master, sometimes I print these out just to kind of get them in my hand and look at them to make sure they're cool before I invest time in the mold. When I go to save mesh, click OK, the name of the file is automatically going to be the name of that body. And again, this will help with the molds as well. Okay, now let's talk about actually composing the body of the mold and some things to keep in mind. It can be difficult to kind of tell how big you want to make a mold, how much space you need. And one thing to keep in mind is that you can adjust these things later with not too much difficulty. So I just like to start out creating a sketch on this, center plane right here, which I think is the, what is that? The XZ plane? Yeah, XZ plane. And then I take a box, I give myself some space in front, and I give myself some space in top, and not as much space in the back. Just like that. Click Finish Sketch. Then I'm going to extrude. And here, the main things are, I want to make it symmetric, and I want to make it 15 millimeters. And 15 millimeters is the minimum because we need to fit our injection hole in there, and it works best at least 15. If you need to make it bigger, because your lure is bigger than that, then that's fine. But it has to be a minimum of 15. And then I say new body. Click OK. Now you have this box here, and your lure is actually buried in the middle. So if I click on that, you can see it's kind of buried in there. And right now what I want to do is I'll click twice on here. I'll hit Control C. Click on here, hit Control V. Space mold, put mold on the end of that. So now I can easily keep these things separate. And that's the basic mold box. Now I mentioned you can go back and change it if you need to later, right? If I decide that this isn't long enough or tall enough, if I come back here, click down here on the sketch, right click, edit sketch, I can pull this and change it. If I want to bring that in a little bit, click Finish Sketch, and it will recalculate the whole thing, and I'm good again, right? And I can do that pretty much at any point in time in my design. And then the other thing I like to do on my mold is make it a little see-through. So I right-click on the mold, I go to opacity control, and I go 50%. So now I can see through my mold, and I can see, in this case, my model in the mold. In a minute, it'll be a hole. All right, the next step I like to do is to actually make the cavity for my lure master. And that's pretty straightforward. You use the combine command up here. Click on that. My target body, I click on my mold body. Tool body, I can click inside here, or I can just come over to the left and click that. And the main thing I like to do here is obviously I want to cut, but I keep tools. And what that's going to do is not remove my master from the document. So if I need to go back and adjust the actual main lure body itself later, it's easy and I can do that. And I click OK. And you'll see that kind of looks like nothing happens. If you come over here to the left again and hit the little eyeball on my mold, or excuse me, on my master, that's gone, and you see I have a hole here. And this is again where the see-through really helps, right? If I had my opacity back to 100%, I don't see what's going on there. But by turning my opacity to something, 70%, 50%, whatever you want, you can actually see through there. Okay, in this step, I like to do my holes, and I do that before splitting. It doesn't really matter if I do it before or after splitting. It just, at this point, it's a little bit less computationally intensive if I have to go back and change my mold size to change it now instead of after I've done a bunch of other stuff to it. So the way I do the holes is a two-step process. The first thing I'm going to do is create a sketch on one of the sides of the mold. And at this point, you pretty much need to decide how you're going to split this mold in what direction, because obviously the holes have to go through each path, each part of the mold. So if I was going to split it along this green line in the middle, I'd have to put holes on the top here, but I'm going to split this on the side here. Ooh, driving Fusion while you're drunk. I'm going to split it down this blue line side to side, so I'm going to put holes on, start them on one of these sides. It doesn't really matter, but they're going to go through this section here. Okay, so I create a sketch and I select the actual side of the mold that I want the holes on. So now I'm going to draw a circle, and I want the circle to be close to the diameter of the bolts I'm going to use. It's not strictly necessary, but it helps to understand your clearances and things like that. So I'm going to use an M5 bolt, so I'm going to use a 5, which is 5 millimeters. If you're using a 1/4-20, you put 0.25 inches in here, whatever you want to do. Okay, and I'm going to move it roughly where I want them all to be, because I'm going to use a pattern here. So I don't want to put it in a place where as it moves down it's going to intersect the cavity of the mold, because that's not going to work. And in this case, this kind of right here looks good. I'm using these guidelines here. Then I'm going to click create and rectangular pattern. And I want to make sure I click on this outer circle here, otherwise it'll just move that point. And I just kind of pull this here to eyeball it. Let me get this out of the way for you. Pull that there, and I'm going to pull this one down and get these lined up at the bottom. Now I try to keep them a little bit as far away from the edge as possible. We're going to be putting a chamfer on this edge, and so it's going to remove some material, and the closer to the main cavity you get it, the less likely it is to run into any problems deforming or anything on the edge of this mold. We want to make sure our seal is tight close to the cavity. It doesn't really matter what it's going on out here. Okay, so now you see I have these 3 holes vertically, so I come over here to the right here, change this quantity to 2. That should eliminate those, and I can add a few more here if I want by adjusting this number. I think 4 is probably good enough. Click on OK and finish sketch. Okay, now I need to actually make the holes. So for that I use the hole command. So you click up here, this whole thing looks like a hole, or you can hit the H key. And that's going to bring up this box. Now what I want to do is my placement. This is where it's a little bit different than maybe a normal hole command. I use the multiple holes sketch, and my sketch points, I select all of these guys. Now whatever the last hole you made, I think that's what it defaults to. So don't freak out yet, just select all these sketch points. And we want it to be a simple hole, right? If you have countersunk bolts you're using, which in my case I do, you click countersunk. But if you're using, flat bolts, you can use simple. For the hole type, I want clearance. That's one of the key bits there. Drill point, I don't really care about. So down here, since I selected clearance, this whole section opens up and I can select what I want. Now, since I selected counter bore, it's going to give me the counter bore machine screws it knows about. I'm on metric, which is fine, and I click M5 because that's the size of my bolts, and normal fit. Okay, if you're looking for your quarter 20s, they're going to be in ANSI unified screw threads, size 1/4 inch. Right, and again, since I'm counterbored, it's going to use the counterbored ones. Okay, but I'm using M5 screws, flathead. Okay, so now I'm going to hold down my shift key and my middle mouse button and kind of cruise around here. Since to make sure I'm going through, but really we can do this by feel, right? So this right here is 23 millimeters. I know that when I did my extrusion on my box, it was 30 millimeters, right? I did 15 millimeters symmetric each side. So I just make this number above 30 and I'm good to go. Click OK, and boom, my holes are in place and all the way through. And that's how you make holes. So let's do our chamfers first before we split. And I do chamfers for a couple of reasons. So the main reason I do it is it makes it easier to remove a flat print surface from the build plate. When we print these, we're going to print them flat. And it also saves a tiny bit of resin, not too much. Okay, so what you want to do is select all your edges. Okay, we're just going to scroll around here, get them all. Alright, so all my edges are highlighted, and I want to do modify and chamfer right under fillet. So fillet's going to do a rounded one, but we just want a 45-degree angle, so we use the chamfer. Click OK, and what I normally do is a 2 millimeter chamfer, right? Your mileage may vary, you do whatever you want to do. 2 is usually good for me. Click OK, and now we're chamfered all around. Again, we're saving that little tiny bit of resin, and when I go to print it, I'm probably going to print this back face onto the build plate, and that'll make it easy to scrape off, get my scraper under there and pop it off. Alright, next step I'm going to do is to make my injection port hole. So I'm going to go around to the front here, and since when I made my lure I made sure to keep everything kind of centered, I want to have the hole in the center here. So there's two ways to do this. I could use the same technique I used before, where I drew a sketch on this front plane and then use the hole command. I usually just kind of eyeball it and create my hole on this surface and kind of just eyeball it into the center there. There's a couple of things you want to keep in mind, right? So I want to do a counter bore hole. That's going to give me that lip here, and I want to do a simple hole. Okay, so that's going to let me adjust the parameters here. So the second parameter is really important. That's going to be the opening that I can put my injector in. And 15 millimeters is kind of standard. I usually go slightly bigger at 15.3. And then this bottom number here is the width of this hole here, and I usually try to make it a little bit smaller, and this is really going to depend on the size of this front face of your lure. And so I can get in here and kind of pull this into place, and what I don't want to do, let's zoom in really close here. What I don't want to do is impact this edge right here, right? So as I pull it in, you can see this inner circle. If that gets past any of that edge anywhere, I'm going to start eating into the lure, and that's not what I want to do. So I just kind of eyeball it and get it close there. Right, that's my edge, and that's that. And that's probably going to be okay. And then I come back and change the depth of my counter bore up here to kind of give me a nice deep pocket to put my thing in. That sounds terrible. A nice hole for my injector to go into. And then I click on OK. And there is my injection port. Now I can come along here and add some fillets. Just click on this outside, hit a fillet, maybe make it 2. And then inside fillet in here is nice. Hit F, maybe make that a 1mm fillet. And so you can kind of round off some of those edges there. Now we're done and ready to split. All right, so we have all the kind of holes and bolts and injection port done. Now is a good time to split your mold. And we've already decided, because our bolts are running kind of right to left here, that we're going to split it down the center on this plane. And splitting is super easy. You come up here, click the split body. Body to split is obviously going to be our mold. So we click that. Splitting tools. This gets a little bit tricky, but we want this XZ plane. Oh no, sorry, we want the, what do we want? The YZ plane. Woo. So I can open up my origin, pull down here, and I can click YZ. You can see it's highlighted. Or I can come over here and hide my body and just kind of come in here and click this plane. Okay, and then I turn my body back on. And before I hit OK, again, it's not the end of the world, but I just kind of look in here to make sure that it's doing exactly what I think, and click OK. And now you see I have a mold and a mold 1. So at this point, I like to just come in here and add an L for left and an R for right. And again, this is just totally organizational. When I export them to STL files, it'll help me keep them kind of organized and not print two of the same sides. Now that we have our mold complete, we're going to add venting. So pick a side. You only want to add venting on one side of the mold. So I usually turn off the right side, and I make sure that my opacity control is set to 100%. Just makes it kind of easier to work with. Okay, so we're going to create a sketch on this face right here. Create sketch, click this face. Now, what I want to do is basically take the outline that already exists of this mold cavity and create a new section of it, if you will, to extrude down and cut out a little vent circle, if you will. So what I do here is I create offsets. So I click the offset button up here, and I can just hover my mouse right over the edge of that cavity. And you can see it all, like the whole thing highlights. Okay, so we can click that, and it's going to give me an inside or positive number, and that's going to make an offset inside the mold cavity. And this doesn't have to be that big. I usually do 0.5. And we have to make two offsets because we need to actually make sure we're cutting over the edge on the inside as well as the outside. Otherwise, we'll be left with like this weird little wall. And you'll also get all kinds of errors, it seems, when you go to do the extrude. So the first one we do is inside positive number offset of 0.5. I'm going to hit enter. We click the offset button again, come back, find that same edge. Right, make sure you're clicking the outside one, not the inside one you just did. Click that. Now we're going to do a -1, and that's going to give me a 1 millimeter on the outside. Again, these numbers are somewhat arbitrary. You could, you know, if you want to do, you know, negative 0.8, you know, whatever. You just need to give yourself a little bit of room to make sure the air gets out. And let's do another 0.5. Let's live on the edge today and do 0.5. Now we have all of this extra mess, and we only really want these that are around the mold. So you have all this extra mess around on the outside, all these little extra sketch objects. And let's just clean those up, get them out of the way. It'll make things a lot easier on us and a lot easier on Fusion. So I click the trim command up here, and I'm just going to start trimming away stuff. And I'm just clicking on them and highlighting them. Highlighting and clicking on them. I'm not clicking on them and highlighting. And basically I'm going to come in here and I'm going to connect these two sections with a line. So I'm basically going to come in here and connect these two sections with a line. So everything kind of outside of that I don't need. There's probably an easier way to do this, but this way, if I make a horrible error, oh yeah, there's, look at that. I can hold and drag. I just learned that today. That's pretty cool. So I click my right mouse button and drag over these, and it deletes them all. It's pretty cool. It doesn't work. Alright, so now I just am left with the outline around my mold cavity, but I need to, oh, there's one more. I need to connect these to close it up so it's an actual, I don't forget what the technical term is, profile. That's what it is. So I'm just going to, I click the line command up here, take this point, connect it to this point. Let's roll in here, this point to this point, and this point to this point. Okay, so now that's a fully enclosed profile. That means there's no open ends here. Alright. Alright. So I click Finish Sketch. I hit E on my keyboard for Extrude. And I'm going to select both of these edges there. Okay, so I have on either side 0.5 millimeter completely going across this line. And I just kind of figured this out today that you need to go across this line. That's why we did an offset on the inside and the outside. Otherwise you can end up with like a little wall and you get all kinds of errors. So by doing this, we make sure we completely blow away that that little edge here that we would have to deal with. In our distance, we just want to do 0.1, which is going to be 2 layer lines thick, right? You might be able to get away with 0.5, but I find 0.1 kind of guarantees you success, and not too much flashing. Again, this is a number that you can certainly experiment with yourself. Oh, excuse me, and we want to make sure that it's negative. Negative 0.1, we're going to cut in, and we click OK. And now we have this tiny little edge all the way around our mold cavity. That gives a quick place for the air to go. But the air needs to get outside of the mold, so now we're going to make the vent holes to the outside. And to do that, I'm going to create another sketch. Again, create this surface face right here. And we're going to draw a line. And I want this line to kind of come, make sure it comes through this kind of topish most section to make sure that as the air is forced up from the bottom, it has a place to escape up top. And when I draw this line, I want to make sure I'm going out past the edges of the mold. I can go really far past the mold, it doesn't really matter, but it just needs to go past. Alright, so that's one, and the easy way to get multiple is to create a rectangular pattern. Select this, grab this line, drag this down, and very much like I did at the top, I want to make sure I get one all the way kind of in this corner. We're going to vent the back, so we don't need to get too crazy, but closer here the better. And then I come over here and change my quantity. Really, it's up to you. I don't get too crazy, but 5 is probably good for a 4-inch mold. Now we're going to finish this sketch, and then we're going to do another extrude, and this time we use the new thin extrude command. So we're going to click that, and we're going to click our lines that we drew Make sure you click those lines and not any lines in here or anything like that. Okay, and our distance is how deep we're going to cut. Again, we did -0.1 last time. And then our wall thickness is how kind of wide this section is here. 1 millimeter is probably overkill, so we'll do 0.5 millimeters. And one thing you can do is this wall location controls which way this cut is going to go. So if I zoom in here, you can see side 1 is going to the right. If I do side 2, it's going to go to the left, or I can do center and it will cut straight down the center. Usually that doesn't really matter, side 1 is fine, but if you end up with a situation like maybe over here, I didn't line this up correctly or something, and I need to cut more, I could cut more to one side or less to one side, etc. Click on OK, and now you can see we have venting all the way around the mold, so air can come out anywhere on this edge and get to the outside. The one last place we need to add one is in the back, so again we create another sketch, click on this back plane, draw a line, and not super critical where you place it, finish sketch, extrude, thin extrude, click this line, my distance is -0.1 and my wall thickness is 0.5. Boom. And there we go. We got a nice little vent in the back. Now one thing on this back vent, since this is the edge I'm going to be most likely printing on, I want to come in here, select these edges, and I want to actually add a chamfer to them, and I'll just do it 0.5, I think, and that's going to open up that hole a little more, because when I print on this back side it's going to expand a little more because my exposure is a little bit longer. And the other thing I want to do while I'm back here, click this edge and this edge, and I want to add a chamfer there, again a little one, oops, 0.5 to there as well. And that's it, we're all vented up. Okay, you're almost ready to go, but what I like to do is make one more change here just to make life easier. And we're going to go ahead and do it on this vent side. And we're going to create a little notch, so if we need to get in here and kind of pry these things open, we can. So we're going to create a sketch, and I like to do it somewhat in the middle, so one of these middle sections is fine. We're going to draw a rectangle, just needs to make sure it's over the top and as big as we can. Now if you know, like you have a screwdriver, a butter knife, or whatever, you can create a dimension here between these 2 points and make sure it is as big as you need it to be. And that's all good. Again, going into here doesn't really matter. And then we extrude it. And we're gonna go, oh man, -3 millimeters probably. Again, if you know what you're using to pry things open with, you can measure it correctly. Alright, that gives me a little section in there to pop it open with. Alright, and that should do it. Alright, and let me show you one more thing real quick that we can do to make things a little bit easier in the shop. Let's go to the back side. Let's go ahead and turn my opacity back to 100%. And let's label this mold. So we're going to create a sketch. We're going to put it right here on this. We're going to create text. And you're going to draw your basic, you're going to draw a box where you want your text to go. cover that one section there. It's going to pop sample text. You come over here and you type in whatever you want. So this is what our triangle tail. So let's just say try hit inner tail and then 4-inch. And of course you can change your font to be whatever you want. I probably want this centered, and now you just need to adjust the height so it all fits on there. And I just start, you know, guessing at this point. That looks good. Okay. Now I'm going to click this, hit Control C, and then Control V, and I'm going to copy it over to this side. Click OK, and click Finish Sketch. Now we're going to create an emboss. Our sketch profiles are the text, and my faces is this face, and I want to select this deboss to make it go in. Okay, and depth of 2 millimeters is fine. The only thing you want to check is just to make sure that you're not running into anything there. Let's make it a depth of 1 millimeter. Okay. Now my other one went away, so I need to turn that sketch back on and create an emboss from the other side. There's no way to create both of the embosses at the same time that I've been able to figure out, so you just repeat the process on the other side. And now you have them labeled. So when they're sitting up on the shelf, you know exactly what they are. And if you don't want to label the bottom here, you know, you can label any of the sides. Now all I need to do is export these to STL. So I click on this one, right click, save as mesh, choose STL, click OK, and then here is where that naming comes in. Name is already there for me. Save it to wherever I save my STL files, and I'm good to go. Right click on this one, save as mesh, click on OK, and click on save. Makes that process a lot faster. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed all of this. Have fun designing your molds. Tight lines, take care.